Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today it's time for another one of our viewer shows. So I've got about 5 or 6 games to look at, and we'll start right away here with a game submitted by Joanna, or Ms. No-No, as the case may be, and she had black in this game, and just wanted me to take a look at it. So here we go. So she has black, as I said, and okay, knight f6, bishop f4. Okay, here she played e6, which is certainly okay. It's a little bit passive, though. I kind of prefer not to necessarily commit to a line where this bishop on c8 gets stuck. Now, of course, you can fianchetto it, but I think probably the most direct way to play in this position would be queen to b6, trying to show that white has maybe brought the bishop out prematurely, or maybe even c takes d4 and then queen to b6. So I kind of like this approach. b3 is not really a move that white wants to make. Queen to c2 is possible because of the threat to c8, but knight c6 I think is pretty good after that. So this I kind of like. I think this is a good way for black to handle the position. All right, so e6, it's certainly not a mistake, but I think it's a little bit cooperative. All right, e3, and then here maybe b6. I would certainly be inclined to consider this, but d5 is certainly not a bad move. But again, with b6, you're taking care of this fundamental problem of what to do with the bishop on c8. So it seems to me, if you're committing to e6, then either you're entombing this bishop, or you should try to fianchetto it. Okay, so d5, knight f3, knight c6. Knight b to d2, and here black played bishop to e7, which is certainly not a bad move. I would prefer to play bishop to d6 if I can get away with it. So the question is, well, does this tension in the center favor white or black? Certainly, if white were to play bishop takes d6 here, that would be very good for black. But white could play bishop to g3. Now, black isn't really in a hurry to take on g3 since she's going to want to castle kingside. So you should just castle and kind of wait. Bishop to d3, maybe queen e7, preparing to play e6, e5. And now white would probably make a very typical move in this kind of setup, knight to e5. Okay, against this, I think a good way to play is knight to d7, and on f4 to play f6. I don't think there's anything really for white with queen to h5. I don't think that this is going to lead to any success. You can just play g6, and I don't think the exchange combination is so serious for you. Well, for white, it's not a problem for black. Whereas on this, then I think black is doing just fine. So bishop to d6 is certainly playable. Oops, sorry. So bishop to e7 was chosen, h3. And now, kind of funny, but this is one of these neat things where you should always pay attention during a game to even little changes. Because now I think it's probably worth playing bishop to d6. Now there's no longer this bishop to g3 idea. White really has nothing better now than to make the exchange. I think knight to e5 is not very effective here at all. So, and on the exchange, on bishop takes d6, queen d6, black has no problems at all. So we're losing a tempo in a way. Of course, we're playing bishop to e7 first, and then in this line playing bishop to d6, but we've taken away one of white's major ideas. Okay, so castles happen, and here white starts to make some strange moves. The normal kind of way to play here would be bishop to d3. White wants to play e4 at some moment. So just finish developing, prepare e4, and then hope to enjoy a small advantage thanks to the little bit of extra central control. So b6 I think would be appropriate. Castles, bishop to b7, knight e5, takes, and now white can recapture either way. Bishop takes e5 I think is fairly level, though. It doesn't really exert any special pressure on black right away. D takes e5 is a bit more ambitious, and I think black will do well here either with knight to e4, so just challenging for the center as well. Both sides might end up with doubled e-pawns, but this is of no real worry for black. Or you could play knight to d7, queen g4, and here you should be a little bit careful. I think queen c7 is okay. And then one funny line is with bishop to h6. So threatening mate, queen takes e5, protects it and grabs a pawn. Knight f3. And now queen f6 would lose to bishop to g5, since the white queen on g4 is, well, sorry, it just wins the queen. I was having a mini hallucination there. Yeah, correct. The queen f6 is bad because of bishop to g5, but it's even worse than I was thinking initially. But what black can do here, and it's perfectly good, is f5. And we end up with a big series of exchanges. And at the end of all of this, material is even, and the position is about even as well. So that's what could have happened, starting with bishop to d3. But instead, I played b3, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. In these kinds of kind of quasi-Kali system positions, it's not exactly a Kali because the bishop's on f4. It's a London system, but it's a Kali type of setup. White wants to have the center and the queen side stable, and to play eventually for e4 in some lines, or to play on the king side. So a move like b3 is just really completely out of character for what white is generally trying to do, especially now that here, as opposed to a Kali, the light squared bishop, the white's dark squared bishop has left the queen side. If white had a bishop on c1 that could come to b2, maybe b3 would be a move worth considering, but here it's just strange. Okay, so black played a6, not really necessary, but not terrible, and then a4. So again, really kind of a further weakening over here. So now with black, I would probably like something like this: c takes d4, which you don't always want to do, but here again, because white has kind of loosened up the queen side, we want to open the c file and go for some play. See, when the pawn's back on b2, if black puts a rook on c8, it doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot, because again, there's the pawn on c3 is very secure. But here it's a little bit less so. So after bishop to d6, again, black will in due course put some heavy pieces on the c file and try to create some counterplay on the queen side. Okay, well instead black played queen to a5, which is not a terrible move either by any means. Queen c2, h6, all right. It's a little bit unnecessary. I mean, I suppose white could have considered knight to g5 and on h6, h4. So it's, it's certainly not completely pointless, but generally speaking, I would prefer to avoid things like that, in part also because it can create a target for white to play g4, g5, and try to break things open. I mean, playing h6 might help white open lines on the king side. Anyway, white played bishop to d3, and this is a little bit fishy because you can see, all right, the queen and the bishop are forkable by knight to b4. Now there's a pawn on c3, but in lines where black puts a rook on the c file, this could become an issue. Of course, the queen on a5 would be a little bit of a tactical problem for black, but you can move the queen away. Anyway, here I would like bishop to d7, castles rook a to c8. And I think again black is doing fine here. Okay, instead she took, and all right, it's a logical move, but I would prefer to kind of wait to make the capture. But okay, bishop to d7. Now here I think, here around the next move, I think white should play b4 and kind of grab some space over on the queen side. Maybe play a5 or knight b3 and maybe knight c5. Sometimes even b5 and put the knight on e5. So white should take advantage while it's possible of this chance. So he castled instead, rook a to c8. And now, again, b4 is possible, the point being that if you take, c takes b4 and the queen is loose on a5. So rook takes c2 won't really help there. So this, I think, was white's a good chance for white to, again, maintain a nice edge in the position. Instead, white blundered with knight to e5, and from here, black won pretty cleanly, and it was really one-sided. So it's what I had mentioned a few times. These tricks on the c file, they finally come into play here. So white played knight e5, which is just a blunder. Knight takes d4, of course, And now white has just lost. Queen d1, rook c3, and there goes a second pawn. And white came up with a combination that shouldn't have worked. It turned out, I think, sort of okay, but yeah, this shouldn't have. So takes, knight takes d7, and now, very, very small quiz. What should black do? The right answer is rook takes d3. So black is up a piece and a pawn, and the knight on d2 is pinned and under severe pressure. So instead, black played knight takes d7, and this justified white's bishop takes h6 idea. So check. Actually, a second blunder, or second big mistake here by black. Just bishop to g5, because on queen takes d4, there's bishop takes d2. So king h8 was really the big mistake. Still, even here, after black's inaccuracies, she's still much better. Queen e3, threatening mate in 2, which black saw. Okay, queen e2, knight e5. So even with the mistakes, I mean, black is still very much in charge here, and the rest is reasonably straightforward. Okay, bishop to a2 is very peculiar. Black should just play rook c2. But okay, rook f to c8, queen f4. And black's pieces are all very nicely posted, a lot of pressure everywhere. Notice, by the way, that after black's last move, the bishop on g7 is hitting the rook in the corner. White did not notice this. And that was the end of the game. Okay, so a game I think that was a little bit instructive in terms of the opening. I mean, we got to see a very common structure, especially in club games. A lot of players like to play the Kali, and some of its close relatives like the London system, and some versions of the Tory attack as well. So, okay, well, let's go on to the next game. And this one, okay, yeah, this is a very nice achievement. So this was submitted by George Hollins, who's a B player. 1714 is the rating he gives at this point. And here he draws with John Ems in a simul. Grandmaster John Ems, very well-known author of lots and lots of opening books. Not just opening books, but mainly opening books. Okay, so Hollins has black. And it's a dragon, or at least it looks like it's going to be a dragon, but he decides to turn it into a Dragadorf, which has been a little bit popular the last few years, although I think its popularity is fading recently. Probably rightly so in my view, but I could be wrong. Okay, castles, bishop to g7, rook e1. So white's playing a very solid system, and here I think black makes an inaccuracy. So here Hollins plays b5, and my impression from when I was studying this, I never played it, but I had a student who was interested in this for a while, and so one of the things that I discovered about this, and this applies even in lines where white is threatening to castle queenside, as long as white has not castled queenside, b5 can be very dangerous for black, because white can subsequently play a4 and really undermine the black structure. So I think it would be better here simply to castle and play in a more straightforward dragon way rather than this kind of half and half setup. Okay, so b5, bishop to b3, bishop b7, and sure enough, Ems plays a4, which is standard operating procedure here. b4, knight to d5, and here I think black makes another mistake, although it's, well, I would say the first one was an inaccuracy. This, I think, is a mistake. It's not really fun to leave that knight on d5, but nevertheless, black probably should, and simply castle instead. So he took, but now after e takes d5, black has two big problems. One is that this knight on d4 may very easily embed itself on c6, which is going to be much worse for black than that knight was on d5. And even if black takes it, the pawn on c6 can be very strong, and of course it opens the diagonal back for that bishop on b3. The other problem for black is with the e7 point. So you've got the rook on the open file, the queen might jump in at some point, bishop to g5 is very likely to occur. So I think all in all, white has a clear advantage here. Okay, well, black played bishop to f6, and again, a very natural move, but maybe another inaccuracy. So takes and takes, and here white is just strategically winning. He still has to win the game, but he's in great shape here. Now, probably the best move here for white is a5. And I'm sure M's considered this, but I think he probably felt that things were going so well, he would just keep going in a straightforward way and maybe blow black off the board, which did not work at all. But a5, I think, is very good. It fixes the pawn on a6 as a weakness, and it isolates the pawn on b4. And I think white would win pretty easily here if he just concentrated on strategic factors rather than trying to win very quickly. So queen d2 is fine, but it's, I think, the first part of a second best plan. So after a5, probably white should play something like queen f4 here, but he plays queen h6. And, all right, if black doesn't defend well, he'll get killed, but he does. So, first of all, white's threatening rook e3, rook h3. So black can't allow that. He plays rook to e8. All right, white took, and then knight to b5, threatening d6, and threatening the fork on c7. And maybe hoping or thinking that black would play something like queen d8 or queen d7, in which case he would play rook to e1, and then rook number 2 would go to e3 and then to h3. But here, Holland's made a good move. Okay, queen e7 is okay. It's not a bad move, but queen e5 I think is maybe even better. I'm not sure, but it's a more feisty move, certainly. He's not going to just sit around and wait and defend. Now here, Ems, I think, makes another mistake. He should just be patient, but again, he's, I think, trying to get rich quick. Maybe he was spoiled by the early successes he had in the game, but he should play queen to d2. So we get the rook into play, get the last attacker into the game, and then, white could maybe come back to h6 at some point. But there's a lot of things he can do. I mean, black has many weaknesses. He has no development other than the queen, which is going to be a target. He has bad pawns on f6 and d6. The bishop on b7 is not very good. I mean, there's a lot wrong with his game, but white needs to use all of his pieces to really finish the job. Instead, he plays f4, which is a real error. It's definitely weakening his king's position. Now, here, black played queen e7, which makes sense here. I mean, a couple of moves before, if he played queen e7 right here, which is okay, white has queen f4, and that forces rook a6, which is kind of clumsy. Then king f1, followed by rook to e1, and white is still definitely much better. Okay, here, though, after f4, queen e7, there's no queen f4, so this is a better version. But queen takes b2 might even be the best move of all. One interesting line is this: rook to d1, bishop a6. So we want to get rid of this knight if we can. Knight d6, queen c3, aiming to play queen e3 check. And now, okay, knight takes f7. So this looks really scary. If king takes, then d6 is, wins pretty serious material here quickly. But knight to d7 is very good. Okay, king h1. And now two moves here for black. Rook f8 is probably objectively the best move, and on knight d6, knight c5. We get rid of this dangerous bishop, and black seems to be not only okay, but even a little bit better here. Okay, a funny line, though, is this spectacular move with bishop to d3. Now, he can't take either way. Rook takes d3, queen e1 is mate. If he takes with the pawn, then queen takes b3 is very strong. He's hitting the rook, he's hitting the a pawn, and he's hitting the d5 pawn, not to mention that the knight on f7 is still hanging. But white can play queen h3, and it seems to be about even after this. All right, so because white is probably escaping with approximate equality here, rook f8 in this position is better than bishop to d3. But in any case, black is doing well, it seems, after queen takes b2. But queen e7 certainly makes sense. King f2, knight a6, and this position is equal as well. The knight's going to come to c5. Black has finally finished his development, or almost, just has to get the rook into play. And white's attack has been neutralized. I mean, what looked like a very easy, quick victory for Ems a few moves ago is now a dogfight. All right, rook e1. And here I think maybe black makes a second best move. I would prefer He played queen to d7. I like queen to d8 better, so the queen can bounce out to b6. But queen to d7 isn't really bad. Okay, white played rook e3, still hoping. f5, and now rook h3. And here, kind of a, well, it's a strange move at first sight, but then when we see what white can play after f6, we can understand why he chose it. But nevertheless, rejecting f6 was wrong. He should have done this. Probably he saw knight takes d6 and got panicky about this, threatening knight takes b7 followed by d6, for instance. And black can't take because queen h7 check, king f8, queen h8 check, and then rook to h7 is mate. I guess I might as well demonstrate this. So here, 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 anywhere, rook h7, that's checkmate. But instead of queen takes d6, which is a blunder, knight to c5 is very good. So the queen keeps h7 attended. The white bishop is going to be neutralized, and there are also some knight e4 ideas. So for instance, bishop to c4 is probably the best. Bishop a6. If knight to b5 now, then knight to e4 check, and the white king is going to have some troubles. So b3 check, takes, and this position is even. White's up a pawn, but black has very good compensation here. Okay, so f6 is what should have been played, but instead black played knight to c5, and well, it's certainly a great square for the knight, but giving up this pawn was not a good idea. Knight to d4, check here, knight f6, here, and now once again M starts to kind of lose the thread. I mean, it is a simul after all, so he again probably kind of checked the box in his mind that this game is his, and you know, let black slip out here. So what he should do at this point is play queen to g7. Now, if for instance queen d8 to bounce to b6, then rook e3 check, knight e4, knight c6 check, takes, hitting f7, so queen f8, queen d4. And here white's up a pawn, and black's king is very much imperiled, and bishop to d5 is also just a very simple materialistic threat, but a pretty effective one. And it's not just that it's materialistic, this knight on e4 is really holding black's position together, so if white can get rid of it and even win a second pawn in the process, so much the better. So he should do that. Okay, so instead he played queen h4, again threatening rook to e3, but black has a defense, queen d8. So now, well, we'll see what happens on rook e3. It's what happened. White should have played knight to c6 check, bringing the bishop back into the attack, and also cutting off some squares to the black king, because in the game, after rook e3 check, he gets to go to d7. Now knight to c6 is too late. Queen b6, knight e4, and all of a sudden, black has some initiative, although it's probably objectively equal. So here I think M's got a bit panicky and played rook takes e4. And here, black is better. Black has serious winning chances. In fact, after h4, I think if he just makes this exchange, he should be winning. So takes, rook f8, and I think black is winning this ending. Notice that white cannot play king to g3 because of, oh wait, let me think. Yeah, can't play king g3 because of e3. And the pawn's going to promote. Well, okay, you can play bishop to d3, but it's very, very suspicious setup here. So, all right, this position is lost for white, whether he goes to e3 or g3 or anywhere else in between. Okay, so black definitely should have taken the opportunity to get rid of this knight. The black minor pieces the white minor pieces can work together in a way that just one minor piece really won't be able to. So maybe he just missed this rook f8, f4 idea. I'm not sure. So he played f5, and now after knight to d4, it's a lot tougher. Certainly black still has the winning chances here, but they aren't anywhere nearly as great, and white was able to hold without too much difficulty. So he just basically sews up the board here. Holland's tried to sack the exchange back, but with material equal and a lot of pawns on dark squares. I mean, black really has nothing, has no way to break white's control over the dark squares. White's queenside pawns are on light squares, but the only one that really is accessible now after b3 is the one on c2, but it's very easy for white to defend that. So just a draw. So, some very good defense by Hollands in this game. An excellent comeback from really a lost position. A little bit of a shame that he didn't manage to win the game, to pull out a full point, but still, nice defense. He kept his head about him and got a draw against a grandmaster. So congratulations. Very good job. Okay, next game. All right, this is submitted by Delaney. Okay, who was black against Chestnut 1129 in a 15-minute game, online 15-minute game. Okay, so his question was how not to lose the opening or lose right out of the opening. Okay, and well, it's a funny game, or it's a very strange opening. Okay, so it's e4, e5. We have this Berlin, and then black played bishop to b4. So I'm inclined to say that it's very easy not to lose right out of the opening or lose the pawn. You just don't play bishop to b4. So there are two main moves for black here. There's knight takes e4, which is the main Berlin move, and if d4, well, okay, I should say rook e1 has been played a couple of times in the last week. So twice people played this against Anand in the Nanjing tournament that just finished. So Carlsen played it against Anand and got a little bit of an advantage by the end of the opening. But Anand improved over his play a couple of rounds later against Gashimov and drew very easily. So rook e1 has a reputation of really not being a very serious winning threat, but at least in this event, it was at least interesting in one round. And the main move is d4, and then we get this famous Berlin endgame that arises here. And I have a very old video in which I talked about this, and you might want to take a look at that. So I'm trying to remember what I think it's called something like The Exciting Berlin. So it's in the archives. And anyway, good deal of discussion there. Black's trumps are, of course, the bishop pair, especially the light squared bishop for, the light squared bishop and possible control over the light squares. For white, of course, it's that he's got a clean majority, and that it's a little bit clumsy, or black's development, in particular with the rooks, trying to get them connected and on the center files, is a bit tough. So anyway, it's a fascinating opening variation, one on which there's quite a bit of theory, not just in the specific sense, but in the general sense of understanding the positions. All right, and there's also bishop to c5, and this is perfectly acceptable too. Here, okay, if let's say bishop takes c6, d takes c6, knight takes e5. Well, this is no big deal. We can just play knight takes e4 here. Rook to e1 doesn't do anything, of course, because the bishop f2 check. And if something like queen to e2, queen to d5, knight d3, castles. So black is able to keep all of his goodies here. He doesn't lose anything. Okay. So this line is not so dangerous for black. All right, whereas after bishop to b4, okay, white, it looks like you can just take this more or less scot-free. Maybe d takes c6 is also a better choice, but in any case, yeah, here taking doesn't really work. If you take, well, now rook to e1 should be quite good. Also, I mean, queen e2 here is probably even better. And also interesting is queen to g4, hitting the g-pawn, but also with a little shish kebab here of black pieces on the fourth rank. So knight takes e4 definitely cannot be recommended. Okay, so anyway, the game was castles, d3, and black did a very nice job of kind of catching up. So I don't want to spend much time on this one, just kind of show the moves quickly. Here I would note that white should have played e5, keeping lines closed. After this capture, black's piece has now very much come alive. I would say black already has, if not full compensation, then pretty close to full compensation. He's got the bishop pair, good central control, and a lead in development. Okay, so b4, bishop g4. Maybe a5 is even better, breaking it up. I mean, black played c5 now, so I would have preferred to keep my c-pawn and do the damage with my isolated a-pawn. Okay, so around here, black's maybe drifted a little bit, and I think with knight e5, white is, again, a little bit better. But, okay, after this, black starts playing very well. Queen c8, it's not a bad move. Okay, maybe bishop e6 is best now, but bishop f8. Okay, here white should take on f6. All right, but knight e5 was a definite mistake, and now black plays great the rest of the way. So bishop f5, threatening to take on b1 and then take on c3. Knight to d7 was good. Okay, so now the a-pawn is hanging, and it can't be defended. Well, it can be defended for one move, but queen d1, bishop takes b1. So knight to d2, queen a4. And now the a-pawn decides. And, okay, white is going to lose a piece here, but he finds a way to lose even more than a piece with king to g3. So now bishop to d6 check and g5. And here white is just losing everything. So he resigned at this point. All right, so a very good second half of the game by black. But, yeah, I wouldn't recommend bishop to b4 for those of you looking for new paths in the Berlin defense. Okay, next game. This is Austin Gwynn against Matt Dalthorpe. I think it was submitted by black, Ufda, and says, yeah, it was a very fun attacking game. Yeah, it was submitted by black. Very fun attacking game with an intentional pawn sack and an accidental queen sack that is still totally winning, but not obvious. Okay, so let's take a look. So we have a Kalashnikov. And here white plays bishop to d3, which I don't really like very much. I would prefer, I think, excuse me, to take and then play either bishop to d3 or knight c2. I mean, white's excuse me, white's big trump in this kind of setup in these Sicilians where black plays a quick e5 is the d5 square and the light squares in general. So I think it makes more sense to play in a way where the light squares are more clearly exposed. So by playing bishop to d3 here, it gives black the chance to play f4, which is what he did in fact play. So white still has the d5 square, but it's more or less a square by itself at this point. And that knight on a3 can't, for instance, maneuver itself to e3 now. Okay, white plays g3, which is a good move. Black took, which is okay. Knight f6, I think, is certainly worth considering, though. Just sacking this pawn, but in return, white's kingside is very exposed. The f-file is quite good, and is a real asset for black, that is. And also, the h8a1 diagonal opens. And so black could consider things like knight to g4, followed by maybe bishop to f6. Certainly, other bishop moves on the diagonal are possible, too. The knight might reach e5. So I like black's position here for the pawn. Okay, instead he took, though. And here again, okay, now that there's no more pawn on f4, I again like this plan of rerouting the knight maybe to e3, or playing maybe knight to d5 straight away is okay too. Okay, he played bishop to e3, which is maybe a little inaccurate. I mean, it's certainly asking black to play knight to g4. I think he should have done this, but he didn't. He played bishop to e6, knight d5, castles, and here I think white makes another, well, mistake really. Plays knight f6. So I would prefer knight c2, but the problem with knight f6 is that you're swapping this very good knight on d5 for one that's just so-so at best, and without really getting anything in the bargain. I mean, we're moving our knight 3 times to trade it off for the piece that's only moved once. Whereas if you keep the knight on d5 and you let black make the capture, well, it's not so good. He can't take with the knight because he would lose a piece. If he takes with the bishop, he's giving up the bishop pair, and both recaptures by white have something going for them. They both open up new lines for his pieces. So takes, I think, is inaccurate. Rook takes, queen h5 here, castles, and now black plays the next stage of the game with a lot of energy here. So knight to b4 is good, bishop to b1, or king to b1, excuse me, and now rook c8 is maybe not the very best move. I think he missed a nice idea. Knight takes d3 and then queen c8 with the idea of bishop g4 and then bishop f3. And of course hitting this and taking advantage of this weakness. So I think this gives black a real advantage here. Okay, so instead rook to c8, bishop e2. So this is a good move, and now the position is about equal again. Here black might try b5 to rip open lines. This certainly looks plausible to me. But bishop f7 was okay. All right, so we repeat, and then queen h3, which was a good move. Bishop g6, and now here white basically loses the game. Well, starts on a big downward trend. He should play f3, and then I think he's in good shape. This bishop right now is maybe not best placed on g6. But after queen g2, now black plays just great the rest of the way here. All right, so clearly this diagonal is a potential disaster for white. But d5 right away is not really so good. So what does he do? He plays b5, and he gets rid of this pawn. So now he can play d5, or okay, he takes first, and now d5. Okay, now this is a problem. All right, f3. Well, we'd like to play d takes e4, but rook takes d8 comes with check. If it wasn't check, then e takes f3 would be check, and then f takes g2. But it's check now, so queen f8. This is very good. Gets off the d file. It hits the pawn here, and maybe in some cases even helps to hit this knight on a3. Okay, white plays bishop to e2. Queen f7, another very good move with a double threat. d4, hitting the bishop and hitting a2, but also d takes e4. Again, queen a2 would be threatened, and e takes f3 with the discovered check winning the house. So king a2, de, b3, e takes f3. Okay, white played queen h3, his last gasp here, attacking the rook on c8. Here, probably the very best move is rook to c2, threatening rook takes a2 mate. So rook to a8 is good enough to win, and it leads to an amusing finish, but it's not quite as accurate as rook to c2. And of course, if on rook c2, if knight takes, then we take the knight, and then we take the bishop, and the knight on e3 still covers the c4 square. Also, of course, after knight c2, we can play f takes e2, or knight c2, and then fe2. So lots and lots and lots of good things for black. Right, after rook a8, though, bishop c4. So here, white might have thought he was off the hook, that he kind of lucked out. I mean, he was only one pawn down, and here he is winning the queen. But, well, his king is not so good. So queen c4. All right, first of all, if knight takes c4, rook a2 is mate. So this and this. Okay, so now black has two pieces and a pawn for the queen, and he's threatening checkmate with rook a2, and he's threatening the bishop with the rook, and also, perhaps in some cases, with knight c2, and then knight takes e3. Okay, so white checked here, rook h2, protecting the pawn, and black didn't bother to take the bishop just yet. He plays rook f to a6, although actually maybe rook takes e3 is better, funny enough, and best of all is actually f2. Little interference move. So now we're threatening rook a2 mate again, and we're threatening f1 queen. But okay, rook f a6 is certainly good enough. Rook here, now rook takes e3, and at this point black has three pieces and a pawn, a very dangerous passed pawn on f3, and an ongoing attack. So, I mean, there are threats like rook e1 check, followed by rook a2, there's maybe bishop f6 and e4, so it's just too much. White falls apart here. Rook a2. Actually, even better was rook to b1, and then that's checkmate. But okay, can't really go too wrong with this. And mate next move. So rook d3, rook takes d3 is checkmate. So very nice attack by Dalthorpe. You know, maybe some inaccuracies in the opening and early middle game, but his attack really rolled, and he's only rated 1563, so I'm extremely impressed, especially given the rating. Okay, on to the next game, and finally we have a game where white gets to be the hero. So this is submitted by Alcibiades, a Class B player, who says that this was okay. It was from an online turn-based game where he had white, and he was his curiosity in particular was in a queen ending about whether or not his opponent had perpetual check. Okay, well, we'll get to that, but I wanted to say something kind of funny or interesting about the opening, and in particular about computer databases. So, after these moves, okay, yeah, so here, the move that I would certainly recommend here is c takes d5, knight d5, and then bishop to b5. And traditionally, white has scored pretty well here, and it's a playable position for black, but white's results here are usually pretty good. But what's funny, and this is the point I wanted to make in particular, what's funny is that if you plug this in to your database, it'll tell you that the main move here is e4, that this is played way more than anything else is. Now, this is absurd, okay, and you might know why it's saying that. All right, why would white play e3 and then e4? I mean, you could scratch your head for a while if you don't kind of if you're not familiar with, let's say, computer databases, where you don't recognize this position. Well, what we have right now is in fact the Sveshnikov Sicilian, but with colors reversed. So that's e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, e5. So let me flip back to that. So watch carefully. So it's just the exact same position with colors reversed. So what a database tells you when it's giving you these move frequencies in its opening book, it's not actually telling you what the most commonly played move is in a given position. What it's really telling you is what move gets you the position that's seen the most often. And most of the time that's going to be the move that's played the most. But here, no one plays e4. Maybe there's some game in the database where someone played e4 just because he liked the Sveshnikov and thought it would be kind of cute to play with white. But all these thousands and thousands of games are really black games, and its colors reversed. So beware of that. All right. So occasionally, when it tells you a move that's played the most often, it's not really the move that's played the most frequently. It's a move that gets you to the position that has been seen the most often. And sometimes, as here, it was a position with colors reversed. Okay. So I have some other minor comments about the opening, but I'll just zip ahead to the queen ending, and not quite to the position where his question was. So I'll go back a little bit. So to right here. At this point in the game, white did the following. Played queen d8, kind of worked his way in, and then played e7. And then the question is, okay, does black have perpetual check here? And the answer is that he doesn't. But going back, I think a much better approach is queen e5 check. And this is a very good rule of thumb in queen endings. Centralization is extremely useful. Not only because the queen, of course, covers lots of squares for, let's say, her own positive purposes, but also because it's going to help restrict the enemy queen. So here, after, let's say, king h7, e7, okay, the queen is still going to push the pawn in, and now after these checks, black is going to be out of checks next move. So the king will go to g2, and that's just the end of that. So the queen is beautifully placed on e5, and white wins just straightforwardly, no problem at all. Okay, so back to the game. Queen d8 instead happened, and then we got this. Okay, so is there a perpetual? It turns out that there isn't, but white has to play very accurately to avoid it, and white did. So queen a2, king d3, only move to avoid the perpetual. Here, and again, king e4, only way to get out. For instance, if king d4, then check. Here, check. Okay, if you go to d4, you just repeat with queen c3. If you take, then queen c1, and now with no f-pawn there, the black queen can get to the king side. So if king g4, there's queen g5. or even queen g1, that'll work too. If king e5, then queen a1, and then this is a perpetual because white has to keep the queen protected, and if king takes g6, well, okay, king e6 is right. Sorry, if king g6, he even gets mated. So king e6, queen c4, etc. Going back to here, instead of king takes f4, if he tries king d3, then check here, and now queen c4, which wasn't available in that queen e5 line that we saw earlier. So white's king is not going to make it to f1 to run out to g2. So back here, king e4 was the only move, but it wins. Okay, here white has a choice of good moves. He played king d4. King f6 might be even better. Here, check, and now queen e5. So once again, this great idea of centralizing the queen, and here the fact that there's a discovered check coming up is quite helpful as well. But king d4 is fine. And now another very important queen ending idea. When you're the strong side trying to avoid checks, very often you can use your opponent's pawns as shields, and that's exactly what white is doing here. And the game ends in kind of a neat way. So after king to b7, white has many friends here. So the white queen and pawn cover the 7th rank. The d5 pawn covers the d file. Of course, the queen on f7 protects the d pawn, and of course the d pawn covers, or well, in conjunction with the f3 pawn, they both do it. They take away the long diagonal, the h1 a8 diagonal, and black's b pawn takes away the b file. So, and of course, white's king being where it is takes away square like a7. So pretty good way of handling the queen ending by Alcibiades, but queen to e5 would have been even better. Okay, next one. Okay, yeah, this is from the Chesser, who I think had white in this game. Yeah, I think he had white in this game. So says he's not sure what happened during this game. Well, let's see. Actually, I'm not really sure who's who in this one, but white wins it. So e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, knight c6. So this is certainly not a move I would recommend. The obvious c5, I don't see any reason not to play this. Okay, anyway, knight c6. So the problem with this is that, of course, black is not putting any pressure on white's center. But black had this kind of quirky idea of just quickly developing his queen side, castling over there, and then trying to play on the king side. I like c4. Okay, but I don't like what white played here. So he played bishop to g5, and okay, it's not a blunder, certainly, but I don't like that it's encouraging black to play on the side of the board where he should try to play and where I think he wanted to play. So instead of this, just bishop to b5 looks quite good. I mean, this is really going to discourage black from castling queenside, because then you play queen a4, or you take and play queen a4, and the black queenside is going to collapse in a hurry. Plus, you're developing quickly. You're going to castle, and then you can consider things like maybe knight to g5 and f4, something very aggressive where you start to go after black, or maybe bishop to g5 then. All right, but here, okay, f6, we don't want to take. I mean, then we're opening up the e file and helping the knight from g8 come out. So bishop f4, castles, bishop to b5. Black played knight a5 here to keep his pawns intact over there, but maybe g5 is interesting here. White can win a pawn like this, but black is definitely getting some counterplay here for that one pawn. So this happened, and again, I would like to just castle here, get my king out of the way, so I don't have to worry about any of these e-file worries. But white played queen a4, and now queen b4 is a good move. And here, all of a sudden, white is again still a bit better, but black is okay. No real damage has been done. Here, I would prefer again to castle, but white played queen takes b4. And this is a really common error in at the club level, especially, where okay, some exchange may be inevitable, so the player just initiates it, just kind of gets it over with. But really, I mean, why do this? I mean, you're helping black to develop by doing this. So let's say you castle here, then it's black's move. Whereas, okay, after castles, if black takes and then plays bishop to b4, well, it's white's move in that setup instead. So queen takes b4 is just giving away a move for nothing. All right, here maybe a6 is best, but okay, g5 is kind of loosening his pawn structure. And then h5 is a further error, I think, in the same direction. Here, white should definitely play e takes f6. That takes care of any h4 worries. And the e5 square is going to be a very nice asset for white. Plus the g5 pawn is hanging. I mean, this is just really good for white. So h5 was a big mistake, and h3 in turn is a big mistake. So takes. Here, I don't like knight h2. I think it's just entombing the knight for no good reason. Okay, f5 is quite logical. Maybe knight c4 is even a little bit better, but f5 makes very good sense. Now I should probably play knight e2, though. Trying to put this knight on f4 and attempt to blockade these pawns. And then slowly but surely improve the position. So something like knight f4, or maybe bishop f4, bishop g5, and then knight f4. Swing the rook over to here, and then play knight f1, e3. So something like this looks pretty logical as a way to arrange the pieces. Okay, instead white played f3, trying to break out forcefully. Knight c4 I think is good, but black played knight h6. Okay, takes, and now a very bad move from black. He plays knight takes g4. He should play f takes g4, keeping the white knight on h2 out of the game and preparing knight f5. So instead, this lets white trade this awful piece. Takes. Here, rook f6 would be much better for white, so we're getting our pieces active. So instead, a3 is a poor move because it encourages black to play bishop b7, which he should do. So he's keeping this bishop, which can become very good. It covers f6, and in some cases, the bishop might even start to cause some trouble this way. You know, you could play rook d to f8, and then threaten bishop to e3. Also, maybe knight to b3. This is also maybe lurking. Even if there's a rook to d1, well, knight takes, rook takes, bishop c5. So something like this might also become an idea. Okay, so bishop takes c3 I think is just bad all the way around. It strengthens white's center. It gets rid of a very good bishop. So white's definitely very happy here. Okay, and also it failed to cover f6, which white now takes advantage of. So here white is in business, and now white misses a good chance. So he should play rook a to f1, threatening rook 1 to f6, which will clean black out of his queenside pawns in a hurry. Instead he played e6, which looks good at first glance, but after rook c8, there really isn't any way for white to make any easy progress at this point. And now there's also no real threat on the 6th rank with like rook a to f1 and then rook 1 to f6. So here the position would be equal, but rook to g6 was just a blunder. So takes, and now white's winning. But we still have one more adventure in the game, at least. King f2, rook e6, and now another blunder, bishop to e5. So just rook to e1, and it should be a routine win. Instead, after this, black picks off the e-pawn, and now it's work again. So white's still much better, but it's not anywhere near as easy as it could have been. Okay, so rook e1 I think is best. All right, bishop f4. I don't like this so much because it gives black's rook more options. So again, white's still certainly better, but I think it's at least a slight error. Okay, rook e4, not really a good square for the rook. Okay, and all right, at this point now it's fairly easy, or should be. I think rook to g3 is best, and then here white's only move to have any advantage, but it's a winning advantage, is king f4 and then g4. Okay, instead he played king a5, and now white's pawns are too fast, or should be too fast. But here actually we have another serious and really inexplicable mistake by black, where he plays b4. After this it's trivial. You can just zip through the remaining moves here. White has one passed pawn too many. And it's even with check. And finally black resigned. But going back here, after a5, it's not an easy win at all. Here, for instance, if d7, b2, this seems to be a draw, like this. Okay, so it's queening with check, so there's no exchange for white. If white's king were anywhere else, well, weren't in check, then queen b8, taking in g7 would win. Okay, so instead of d7, white needs to play this right away and then take. But this is not a trivial ending to win. So it is a win, but not an easy one if black plays resourcefully. Okay, so a lot of inaccuracies in this game. I would say if there was a common theme to the errors, I would say it was white. Well, when white was making errors, it was by engaging in active play on a part of the board where it benefited his opponent. So you always want to think about that, especially in positions where you're castled on opposite sides. I mean, generally speaking, you want to keep things stable and relatively dull on the side of the board where your opponent may have attacking chances, on the side of the board where your king is, whereas you want to have all the excitement and all the fun going on the other side. Now, it's not a law. I mean, there are always going to be exceptions, but in terms of, let's say, a rule of thumb, or in terms of the burden of proof, you need to convince yourself, you need to have some good reason why you should play on the side of the board that more or less, or that's supposed to belong to your opponent, rather than not doing so. Okay, so on to the last game. This was submitted by Dizzler, who I believe was black in this game, Alparslan Yalcin. And he says this, okay, I've enjoyed the analysis of many of the users' games. I wonder if you can analyze my game too. Just a few notes. The moves 30 to 40 were played while I was under time pressure. Okay, yeah, all right. So basically wants to know what kind of plan he could have found in the early middle game. So let's take a look at this game. Okay, he had black, so let's flip it around. So he goes for this hedgehog. I'm not sure that I really like this line so much. I would probably play, well, I would be tempted to play d5 and then go for either this kind of symmetrical position, or maybe even better, go for this this Tarrasch line. I think black should be fine in this kind of variation. But okay. Also, instead of b6, you can play slow with knight c6 or bishop to e7. Something like this looks fine to me. Until you've really committed to b6, I think white's setup really doesn't make so much sense. And whenever he plays b3, you can play b5 or d5, taking advantage of the loose white knight on c3. Actually, that might be a reason to play queen c7 straight away, so he doesn't have the chance to play b3 safely. Anyway, he played b6, and here, instead of bishop to e2 and then f3, maybe queen f3 immediately is worth considering. Queen g3, threatening the knight, and on knight c6, takes, and e4. And this might be slightly favorable for white. Okay, anyway, he played bishop to e2. Okay, so we reach this position. Obviously kind of a typical hedgehog structure, although white has played it in a pretty unpretentious way, in an unambitious way. But the thing about the hedgehog is that if white doesn't play with much ambition, it's tough for black to do very much either. I mean, it's very much a counterpunching system, which means that, okay, if your opponent doesn't punch in the first place, well, there's nothing to really counter. All right, so white played king to h1, which I think is rather strange. Well, for a number of reasons. I mean, one is that there's nothing even resembling danger on the a7 g1 diagonal, and it's even stranger still because one idea in setups like this sometimes is for white to go for a g4 g5 advance. So king h1 just seems kind of nonsensical to me. All right. Here, black played rook a to c8. Could also just play knight to e4, but he's higher rated, so he feels the need to do something. Although knight e4, I think, is not bad. Anyway, rook a to c8, e4, knight c5, I would probably rather play rook f to e8. I mean, one of these kind of stock rules of thumb about the hedgehog is that it's often a good idea for black to post one rook opposite white's queen. I mean, the funny thing about the hedgehog is that his rooks can be good on almost every single file, so he doesn't really have enough rooks for the number of possibilities that he's got. So if you got to choose, though, usually one goes on the c file, and the other one goes wherever the white queen is. All right, so I would prefer this. Anyway, knight c5, rook f to e1, and here black played g6, which I'm not sure that I really like this. Well, I should say I don't really like this move order. There's nothing wrong with the move, but I would rather play rook f to e8 again, and then maybe play bishop to f8, and only play g6 when I'm ready to play bishop to g7 as a follow-up. So anyway, my 2 cents. Okay, g6, rook a to d1, rook f to e8, knight c2, and here maybe b5 can be played. So this looks like a little tactical possibility, but a decent one. Similar to what happens in the game, though. So takes, and now, for instance, okay, this is certainly good for black. And on this, I'd say the position is roughly equal. Probably playing b4 though is just fine for black. So in the game, he made I think kind of a needless prophylactic move, or not prophylactic, a needless building move with rook to b8. Excuse me, f3, b5, and here I think white can maybe obtain an edge with takes, and b4 followed by a3. The pawn on b5 looks a little bit exposed, and I don't think that black has that much counterplay. So it's certainly not a big deal, but I think white has managed to keep the queen side stable, and at least the weakness of b5 is a tiny bit annoying. So I'd prefer white ever so slightly, but not a lot. Okay, so knight to e3 though I think is definitely a mistake. So now black plays this blocking plan with b4, and this I think is quite good. So here, and now, well, what does black do? He played a5, but I think the problem was that he took forever to play a4 in the game. I mean, that would really be the logical way to go. It's essentially a kind of a minority attack approach. You're going to take on b3, and that pawn is going to be a weak base pawn, and then of course black can play rook a8 and rook a2 and try to exert some pressure in that way. Also, an interesting idea here is to play e5. So this, of course, gives up the d5 square, but it's only one square. So takes, now maybe a5, and if, okay, it's a bit of an if, but if black can engineer an exchange of the dark squared bishops, then he's going to have maybe a really big advantage. Anyway, a game I would suggest to take a look at this, it's a very funny game. It's played between Sefc, I'm not sure if that's the proper pronunciation, it's SEFC against Petrosian. They played twice, I think, in the same event in maybe the late 50s. I think maybe like 1957 or 59, I forget. And the game in question is one that Petrosian wins in something like 96 or 97 moves. I mean, he just keeps tacking around in circles, looking for some way to take advantage of this death grip he's got over the dark squares. And it takes him a long time, but he slowly but surely builds and takes turns infiltrating on d4 and c5, and sometimes looks at f4, but plays king g7, f5. Very nice game. So definitely take a look at that in the databases. That'll give you some idea of the kinds of things that black will try to do in the long run in a position like this. So that was certainly more favorable for black than this is, but again, I think it'll give you an idea of how to play this kind of position. Anyway, here maybe white should try f4, and then black can consider f6. Maybe bishop to f6, although I'd have to check to make sure that works tactically. But again, if black can swap the dark square bishops, then all things being equal, that's very much to his advantage. Okay, so in the game, it's a5, takes, rook d6, and actually I think this pawn sack is not bad for black at all. I think black has completely adequate compensation and should play, again, a4. So the thing is, I mean, with this pawn sack, I mean, black's bishop is now just a beautiful piece. It's unopposed, and it's got a great diagonal. And white's extra pawn is completely blockaded, and his pieces are, well, many of his pieces are very passive. So I think this is a good way for white, or for black to play, the sacrifice. Okay, so queen c7, not really sure where this is going. It's not bad, but it's not great. So again, a4, play a4, 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 a4. Okay, instead he played h5, which I don't really like. It's weakening, and knight to g4 wasn't really such a big positional threat. Okay, knight c2 is a good move here. Queen e3. Okay, now maybe you should take and play queen e5 to stop any f4 stuff and to jump into b2. So again, black has to find some way of making things happen on the queen side. I mean, that's, I think, the right way to handle this position. Okay, that's where his advantage is. Despite the fact that he's down a pawn over there, he's got more space. This bishop cuts through. The knight on c5 is fantastic. So that's where you should be playing, not on the king side. Okay, so in the game he played bishop to g7. f4 was good. e5. Okay, so he's trying to play against this bishop. He's also clearing e4 as a potential square for later use for a knight. And now I think black makes another and still serious error with f5. Okay, I don't like this at all. I should play something like this, just trying to blast the lines open again for the bishop. I mean, look at this position. Okay, so here, after f5, I mean, what happened to this bishop, black's bishop? I mean, it can still have some prospects going back to f8, the knight moves, and then the bishop goes to c5, although that's not going to make the knight very happy. But compare that with what we had just a few moves ago, where here this bishop is not at all under any kind of constraint whatsoever, and is just operating very nicely. So, yeah, I think this h5 and f5 idea is just is really not very good. So now g6 and e6 are weak. White has a potential outpost square on d6, and the bishop is bad. Okay, here I think h3 is better than what white did. Okay, now here, okay, so yeah, instead of queen b6, maybe king f7 is a better move. Just kind of tighten everything up so you take control over e6 and g6. After queen to b6, maybe white should make this exchange sacrifice. And now, of course, white has lots of targets. Black should probably just swap the queens here. But even in this ending, I think white is significantly better. So this, I think, would have been a very good idea. He's got two pawns for the exchange. The knights are very good. Black's bishop has no real targets. Maybe e5 a tiny bit, but nothing too serious. So this would have been good for white. Okay, instead he played knight to b5. Here black should play, I think, bishop f8. No reason or no need to swap off all the rooks. So it's funny, both sides fail to, I think, properly value the d file. So white in turn gives it back. And the position should be equal here still. So this knight on e4 is very good. White's knights are not so smart. And the white king is just exposed enough that black should have sufficient compensation, sufficient counterplay. Here a move I like is g5. Again, trying to blast open lines. Now it relies on tactics, in particular that queen h5 is a blunder, because after queen to d3 check, well, the knight's going to drop with check, or something worse will happen. So here, if the king goes to the back rank, the knight hangs. If king f3, queen f2 is mate. Actually, king g1, queen f2, king f1, queen f2. So all that's bad, and if king h3, then check, and then it's a forced mate. Either queen f2 or queen h2 will mate in one or two moves. Okay, you can play knight to d2. You can make a spite interposition and make it go to 3, but that's it. All right, so anyway, black played queen b6, which isn't bad either. Okay, and then here, black, I think, loses the thread, although he gets a second chance. He should play h4. So again, you got to play actively. So it's just kind of strange. I mean, really in this game, black had all these chances to make these pawn breaks. a4, h4, f6, g5, and over again he kept the position really, very tame. I mean, he just try to play only with pieces. And on all these occasions, there were lots of good ways of making these pawn breaks that would really liberate many more possibilities for his pieces. So I would say that's clearly the big lesson to be drawn here, is that you don't have to keep the pawns in place forever like furniture. I mean, they can move and be dynamic, and that would have really helped the position a great deal for you. Okay, so here, for instance, if queen e3, the move as played in the game, then queen g2, and well, white definitely has a lot to be careful about here. So the knight on f1 is kind of stuck, or his kingside will just evaporate. g5 may be coming. Queen takes a2 might be played at some point. Maybe bishop f8, c5. That looks pretty dangerous as well. So black has very good counterplay here. Okay, so queen b6 is just a mistake. We're just, the queen was at a great spot. It was active. It was doing things. So we don't want to withdraw. So queen e3, queen c6, and now a last mistake, knight to d2. This gave black a chance to just play knight takes d2 and then come in with the queen and still cause some troubles here. Again, a pawn break move. And this is still very unclear. So we're threatening to take on f4. In some cases, we're maybe threatening to play like queen c3 check, king d1, queen a1 check, queen a2, and so on. So black seems to be completely fine here as well. So instead, knight to c5, and this was the final mistake. From here, white doesn't give black any more chances. Queen f3, again not letting the queen in, and thanks to the knight on c5, the other diagonal is now closed. After queen d7, white checked. Knight to d6, so we're taking the d file away too. And now queen c8 forces a trade of queens, and here it's easy. Now, finally a pawn break, I note. But too many white passers here. So if knight e5, fe5, and the e pawn can't be taken because the d pawn will promote, and also in the meantime white will advance the c5 pawn. This should win. So black retreats. Okay, f5, f4 is covered. And now 2 pawns is one too many for the black knight to defend against. And knight b8 breaks the blockade. So a very interesting game. And again, I think we can chalk up black's loss to his reluctance to make some kind of pawn break, and there were many opportunities to do so. But very interesting game. Okay, I think that's all the games. Yep, so we are done, and so that'll do it for now. I'll look at some more games next month, and until then, well, I'll see you before next month, but that's until then as far as viewer games goes. But I will have a new show for you next week. So thanks a lot, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.